Everybody knows that making D&D characters is one of the best parts of the hobby, and we all probably have a huge backlog of characters to play. I know I have, but I decided that was a little too boring. So instead, I decided to change up the formula. Math classes and proficiencies can all get in the way of what is one of the best parts of the game, making a unique character, and so I decided to do something about that. Pulling an entire community of D&D players together, I have figured out a way to make one single incredible character with the minds of thousands of other people. What I do is I pull the lovely patrons over on my Patreon in order to get a bunch of different words to put into a character. I then take all those words, totally random selected by the patrons, and ship them over to an artist. I ask the artist not to let me give any input and let them make a totally unique character. However, they do not tell me any of their intentions. I then take the art, I bask in its glory, and I go over to a stream where all my viewers help me determine what sort of build would match this character, levels 1 through 20. Once we've done that, I take everything together, I create one video where I tell a story about the character, present their build, and let the entire D&D community use them for whatever they want, whether it's an NPC, a PC, or even a villain. This is D&D character creation. So, for today's character, we have one that I am incredibly excited about because we continue our roster of creating a party that could actually fit together. So far, all the characters that we've created actually could be put together in a single party, and I think it would be a lot of fun. And today, we complete that with the last role that we were missing, a frontline tank and fighter. For this one specifically, we shipped everything over to the artist and they created a really fun design that has a lot of flavor that I very much enjoy. And rather than stretch this out and try to find a way to build anticipation, instead, I just want to show it to you. So please, without any further ado, enjoy this month's character, Cabrera Mortis. Cabrera has such a fun and immediately evocative vibe that I enjoy so much while looking at her. It is such a unique flavor and silhouette, and I think that they really just enveloped everything perfectly for the character. Now, these are the words that we used for this month's character, and I really liked it. I think the usage of the adjective torpid, which I specifically did not know what it meant until this was chosen by the patrons, is amazingly enveloped by this character, and I think it does such a fantastic job. Now, if you notice, they are also a changeling, and that is going to carry a lot into their character. And I think it is one of the funnest designs we've done, and one of the best builds that we've done so far. I think it's a really fascinating, very flavorful, and honestly pretty effective one. So, let's get into the story, and then find out what this character is all about. A young, blonde, thin individual walked through the streets, looking around themselves as they tried to get their bearings. They weren't familiar with such a large town. There was so much activity. There were people on the streets, stalls yelling out trying to get you to buy their product, and even animals occasionally moving forward, almost running her over. No matter which way she turned, it always seemed like there was something more going on, something more to catch her eye. Yes, she was new to traveling, and she'd begun to get used to it, but still, sometimes the sights just, well, they amazed her. However, she was not here to sightsee. She was here with a mission. Shaking her head, she moved to clutch her tools and keep them close to herself. She had been warned about pickpockets after all. And rather get distracted by the incredible sights and sounds, she decided to move to one of the smaller side paths, where there was less distractions and more ability to focus on her task. She was looking for one particular place, and she would not get distracted again. Due to her being new to the city, however, it took her a little bit of time before she was finally able to see it. Right in front of her, a small little hole in the wall next to a graveyard, with a large sign sitting across it. Madame Cabrera's Mystic Emporium. Oh gods, she mumbled to herself under her breath in annoyance while she rolled her eyes. She knew that this person was nothing more than a charlatan, somebody who was scamming people out of their money, and poor grieving souls at that. All of her research had led her to this conclusion. And yet still, she was pretty certain that this person was the one she needed in order to find her goal, and so she was going to have to go in there and play their game, at least for now. Regardless, her distaste for the subject matter didn't stop her from feeling a little bit excited. She was at least going to be able to put a criminal in their place, and that had to be worth something. As she moved forward, she realized there was no door into the small building, but instead just a small curtain of beads which she moved aside and caused a crackling sound. Somehow, she felt she had expected more, maybe skulls lining the place, or a large array of different designs so that it would catch the attention of whoever entered and make them convinced that this was legitimate. But honestly, this was just a small shack. It looked like there was a cot in the side, maybe a pot for cooking, and a door leading out to the graveyard. Almost nothing else. For a moment, she considered snooping around before suddenly a large figure began to enter through the door, thin in frame, but tall, and a little intimidating. Even slouched over, this figure was almost 6 foot tall, standing straight. Who knew how tall she might actually be? It was difficult to tell too much about the figure. She could tell they were thin, yes, but they wore incredibly baggy clothing, purple and grays and different colors of orange. And she had long, black, greasy hair that seemed to hang over her eyes, making it impossible to actually see her face and where she might be looking. For a moment, Valerie legitimately considered just turning around and leaving. Maybe this wasn't worth it. But she had come too far. She was here for a reason. Hello. Do you happen to be Cabrera Mortes, the psychic medium? Almost immediately, a raspy chuckle began to ring out from the figure as they moved to set something down. A bag with something heavy in it as it made a large plop. Psychic medium feels a little too on the nose. Yes, I speak for the dead. Would you like a reading? Her voice was gravelly, but her tone was soft, as if she was barely able to get the words out without caring much for what they were going to say. She was simply speaking because she had to, not because she wanted to. Cabrera's long fingers moved up to a light in the corner of the room, and as it lit the lamp, it provided a much better view of her actual face for Valerie. She had deep, sunken eyes that looked tired with bags underneath them, but a smile nonetheless. She looked almost just like she wanted a nap and nothing more, but she was willing to entertain Valerie, and it gave her a little bit more of peace to be here. Yes, there was an individual I knew who passed away some time ago. I was hoping to potentially get a reading from them and find some information out that they were never able to give me. I'm willing to give it a shot if you are. I would be very thankful for the attempt. I can pay you. Cabrera smiled as she lazily shook her head, her hair moving along with it on an almost hypnotic stance. She moved to grab one of the only pieces of furniture in the room, the cot, as she moved to scoot it into the center while keeping an eye on Valerie. Payment is not something that I look for anymore, though I appreciate it. This immediately took Valerie off guard. No payment? How did she scam people out of things if there was no payment? She was going to have to keep a much closer eye on Cabrera. It seemed her game was much more intense than she realized. Nonetheless, the two sat down and Cabrera began to set up strange things all around. Different pieces of skulls or tarot cards, all of them pulled out of the sack that she had brought in. Eventually, she created a full ring around them, and Valerie had to squirm a little bit in her seat to not get too uncomfortable. They both sat cross-legged on the floor with the cot in between them, and Cabrera held out her hands for Valerie to hold. As she did so, Cabrera looked deeply into Valerie's eyes, and for a moment, she felt a deep lump begin to form in her throat. Go on then. Tell me the name of the person which you wish to speak. Votu Nostam. Cabrera raised a single eyebrow before closing her eyes and concentrating, and as a deep hum began to emanate from her chest, Valerie gasped, shocked as the very form in front of her began to shift and move, almost as if it was impossible to focus her eyes on any one feature, but by the time it finally did refocus, there was an entirely new figure in front of her. Strong, powerful, he looked like a warrior with a stoic gaze in his eyes and a steely look upon his face. He maintained firm eye contact with Valerie as her breathing began to quicken. Was this really him? Had she actually channeled the spirit of this individual? No, it had to be an illusion. She had seen those before. She needed to concentrate. She would not get scammed by this individual. She just needed to get the information which she had come for. As she began to open her mouth to speak, the figure in front of her immediately began to shift once again, and Valerie found her words getting stuck in her throat. In moments, Cabrera was standing in front of her once more, but this time, the woman seemed to have an almost angry look upon her face. Nice try, but you cannot scam someone who knows how to scam. What? I'm sorry, I don't believe it. This figure does not know you. They have never known you. Your face is a mystery to them, which means you are trying to lie to get information from the dead. Valerie sat, dumbfounded, the little bit of color that was in her pale skin having left the moment that this happened. How had she known? How was it possible for her to have known? Was this not all a scam as she'd been led to believe? Could this figure actually speak with the dead and channel their thoughts? Before she could finish any more of her thoughts, suddenly she heard a loud slam as the door behind her cracked closed by itself, and the lights in the room immediately began to flicker and go dim. Cabrera stood up, slowly, beginning to stretch to her full height and looming over Valerie as she stood, frozen, paralyzed in fear on the floor. Cabrera reached behind her back and pulled out what looked like a long, rusty spike shaped in the form of a spear as she leaned down towards Valerie, a furious look in her eyes, and a growl emanating from her throat. I don't know who you are, but I do not appreciate anybody desecrating the memories of the dead. I have spent enough of my life doing this. Who are you, and why are you trying to steal the secrets of the past? Valerie tried to speak, but the words simply wouldn't come out of her mouth. She had no clue who she had just messed with, but she had a feeling it was going to be far more difficult to get out of this situation. So when looking at Cabrera and trying to figure out her build, immediately there was one obvious thing screaming at us, that this was a Grave Cleric. I mean, looking at the design, it was clear that that's what the artist intended. However, I did have a moment with the stream where I spoke about it. I was not against Cabrera being a Grave Cleric, however, I felt that it was a little bit outside of what was supposed to be the spirit of the show, and so I had a little bit of a heart to heart.
Obviously, this was intended to be a Grave Cleric, and I do want to respect the artist's wishes, but the point is to make the most interesting possible character. My best example of this is, remember when Caduceus Clay from Critical Role showed up? A lot of people immediately assumed he was a druid because of his design, but he was a Grave Cleric. So sometimes the design is misleading and plays more into their occupation than their class. I still do really like the Grave Cleric aesthetic of this, but all I'm saying is, let's make sure to make the most interesting character possible. The art is a reference to expand upon. It's the foundation. It's not necessarily the lot. So they scream Grave Cleric, and that will be an option we choose on. But I want to choose the one we're most excited about, not just because it's obligatory to the art, right? So everybody toss out what you think would be a fun, exciting subclass, a divine domain for the cleric, and we'll decide that.
After speaking with them, coming to a conclusion that yes, Grave Cleric was an option, but we needed to choose the one we were most excited about, not the one that was obligatorily there, we continued to move forward. And we decided to land on something else, a Twilight Cleric. Given what they look like, given Cabrera's general vibe and attitude, I thought it landed perfectly with what we were doing. Plus, Twilight Cleric has a lot of really cool abilities, but there's one in particular that began to lead us down the path of choosing what this actual build was going to be. See, Twilight Clerics get an ability which allows them to envelop themselves in a shroud that follows them and gives them temporary HP, which leads a little bit into them being a frontline tank, and that's when things started to change. I began discussing with the stream, and while yes, Cleric was fun, we started talking about creating a Barbarian multiclass Cleric, which is a little interesting and unusual, but I thought it could be awesome. And so I began discussing with them, and after some back and forth where some people disagreed with me, eventually everybody decided, yes, this would be a very fun way to go. We were going to create a full tank Cleric that would act as a frontline in a party. And so we began to do so, and we started to choose different spells that would go along with it. See, Spiritual Weapon does not require any sort of concentration. And what does Rage do? It prevents you from holding concentration on a spell. And so it went perfectly alongside that Rage. Plus, you could use your action to cast that Twilight Shroud around yourself, have your Spiritual Weapon up. They are not both spells, so you can't use both of them in a turn. And then the next round, Rage, and just generally be a nuisance in the front line. Just be a giant tank. I thought it was really fun, and I really liked that idea, especially because they had that tombstone shield. I mean, come on, it just really seemed to nail the flavor of the class. So as we continued to build this and we continued to work, we decided to try and figure out what sort of path the Barbarian would be. What would they choose? And eventually, somebody nailed on something that I really liked. The idea of an ancestral barbarian began to pop up, and because they were a changeling, as they worked as an undertaker, when they buried people, they could take their form and act as a sort of medium, going to people and giving them their loved ones' last words as if they could somehow speak with them in the mortal plane beyond. Now, obviously that was a little bit of a lie. The background was charlatan after all, and they became this sort of scam artist by doing this. But as time went on and they continued to envelop these personalities, they began to develop. Yes, it was the last words, but they actually were able to cast Speak with Dead on these bodies. And as they spoke with them, got their last words, took their form, all that, and all for the scam, they began to actually develop personalities for each of these individuals that they were stealing the identity of. And they began to legitimately have the spirits of these undead people waiting within them, as magic and D&D sometimes latches on to a strong force. So as time went on and they continued to gain these personalities, they became an ancestral barbarian. No longer were they just scamming people by taking the last words and pretending to be their spirit from beyond. Now the spirits literally were inhabiting Cabrera, and it was her job to go out into the world and actually genuinely take things on, to enact the last will of these spirits, which she had once been trying to use to scam, but now felt she had a duty to perform. And I really liked that flavor. This undertaker who had taken in the spirits of these other people and who went out to enact the last will and take vengeance on those who had been wronged and died, and only she knew about it. And she became this sort of passive force for good. Because yes, she was chaotic and she was a charlatan, but now she really did feel bad for these lost souls and wanted them to be able to experience peace, and they would become a part of her collective. Honestly, I really liked the flavor of it, and I thought it was very, very fun and really fit well for this type of build, creating this very tanky individual who could be a frontline fighter, but also just to have that amazing amount of flavor. Honestly, I really like Cabrera, and I hope that you guys can use her and really enjoy her as an NPC, villain, PC, whatever have you. Also, I hope you guys enjoyed seeing Valerie again. I thought it was fun to tie her into the backstory and start to bring these characters together as if maybe they could be a party one day. Anyways, thanks for watching. Go out into the world, make your own, you beautiful bastards. Don't forget to have a great day, and never forget to play your role.
This video wouldn't be possible without the incredible, beautiful bastards over on our Patreon. I'd like to give an additional very personal thank you to the Divine Bastards Big D the Cool Guy, BKBW, Clark Smith, Diet Blue, Duplicolor, Manifestering, Rocky, Sassy Cat Productions, Sorit, Supreme Court, Talia Martin, Tin Eye, Void Mystic, Volpe Nico, and Zombies Were People Too. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without you guys, and you mean the absolute world to us. Keep being beautiful, keep being amazing, and as always, make the world your own.